the book with.
Oh, good.
In case we need to quote anything.
That's very good.
Things, because I am an eternal student.
All right, so we are live. Thank you for everyone who might be watching our book club panel discussion. I'm Tara. I'm the organizer of Ice and Fire Con. This is actually going to be the Lady Gwen and Lydia show. But I just wanted to come in real quick and say, for anybody who might have joined us last night on the Small Council Affair webcast, thank you so much. And if you didn't see it, then definitely check it out. Don't forget that at 8 p.m. Eastern tonight, so about an hour after this panel discussion ends, we're going to have a live stream of Westeros, an American Musical with the creators and cast chatting alongside. So that's going to be really fun. And you'll actually be able to see and hear the musical along with us. So I'm really excited about that. And if you have not checked out our Patreon yet, you can find it at patreon.com/iceandfirecon. They knew all the deets of like 90%, 95% of what's going on this weekend before anybody else. And we made some, other announcements last night in the webcast about some exciting patron stuff that we have coming up as well. So definitely check us out. You can join for as little as $1 a month. And then also, this is just, I wanted to make the little announcement that the reason we're doing this book club discussion online is because, we all kind of read this book fairly recently, but by the time October will have rolled around, it would have been a long time unless people really wanted to reread it closer to the new dates. So, that's why we're having this discussion as part of our virtual content this weekend. But also, that means that we get to choose another book for Ice and Firecon Book Club this year. So I actually went through and checked the voting from the poll we had last year because I didn't want to have to run a brand new one, do it all over again. And the second place book was a book called Senlin Ascends by Josiah Bancroft. I don't even know how to describe it. It's a little bit fantasy. It's a little tiny bit steampunk. It's got some great characters. The author actually, I know him. He is a friend of a friend, and my buddy kind of said, "Oh, you should read my buddy's book." And there's 3 books in the series now, and a 4th coming out. So it's a really good series. And Senlin Ascends, I think, it's right up a lot of Ice and Firecon fans' alleys. So, all right. Well, I'm going to turn this over to you guys to talk about Who Fears Death by Nnedi Okorafor, and I will see everybody later. Have fun.
Hi. All right.
We should probably give a trigger warning, I thought, maybe at the beginning.
It's a good idea. Yeah.
This book is about some a central plot point is a graphic depiction of sexual assault.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's just putting that out there.
Mm-hmm. It's got some real serious plot points, I would say. I think if I wanted to start out with, if there's anyone in the chat that wants to weigh in as to who has actually read the book, besides us two, that would be,
It may just be you and I. A lot has happened since January,
right? We keep saying that. Yes. Hi, Elena. We keep saying that it feels like I read the book in January, which I don't know, feels like 30 years ago at this point. Might as well be. But I think we have a pretty good grip on having reviewed this last week. What's going on? So,
well, the book's divided into 3 sections.
That makes it good for discussion. It's for those of you who don't know, Who Fears Death was optioned by HBO and is in development as a series with George R.R. Martin as executive producer. That was back in 2017. So far, they've added a scriptwriter, but there's been no further news as to progress. But so we have something to look forward to there. Did win the 2011 World Fantasy Award, so it's an award-winning book. And also, one thing I found out just today when I was looking up some details is that there's actually a prequel. So if you read the book and you loved it, Nnedi published a prequel in 2015 called The Book of Phoenix. So there you go.
I'm writing that down right now.
Yeah. So I don't know if I can. Maybe I can just put them in the chat. I was going to maybe put these on a banner, but I found some great resources for anyone who's interested. Nnedi on her website has a reading guide. So that is interesting. And I can't figure out how to add to the chat. So I will add to the chat. Well, anyway,
in the Facebook group later.
Yeah, on the post we'll actually add some of the links that we have here, because we've got the reading guide and we've got an article that's very interesting about some of her inspirations for the story. So
I listened. Go ahead.
No, that's it. I was just say that's it. That's all
I listened to this as an audiobook, and there's real pros and cons for this particular book as an audiobook versus reading it tangibly, because I think different kinds of information stuck with me in the one medium over the other one. There's because this is set in a post-apocalyptic Sudan. There are a lot of words in African languages that, and not only that, but there are a lot of cultural concepts that might be unfamiliar to a Western reading audience. And I am a Western reader. So I was having difficulty trying to imagine some of these things. And I appreciated while I was listening to the audiobook that I could hear the narrator pronouncing words. But on the other hand, sometimes when you listen to an audiobook, you're multitasking. So you're not always absorbing plot points that you would get better if you were reading it the tangible way. So I did bother to get a tangible.
Yeah, right. Which is, I did read it, but I read it on my iPad. So always glad to see someone who has the actual book in their hand.
I work in the library. It's handy.
I was a bookseller for 15 years, so I'm a big fan of actual books.
Cool.
Yeah. So yeah, it seems like a lot of people who are commenting that they have actually read it, or maybe some people read it a while back. So you touched on the setting. It's in Sudan. It's a future, post-apocalyptic future Sudan. The basic plot points are that you have two peoples. You have the Nuru, who are light-skinned, and the Okiki, who are dark-skinned. And the Nuru are oppressing the Okiki. There's a real, almost like a campaign of genocide going on. I mean, it's not almost. It is. It's a genocide going on. She's obviously taken a lot of inspiration from the real world. The protagonist is Anya Sanyu, who is called Anya by her friends and family, but Anya Sanyu is actually means who fears death in Igbo, which is apparently the language in real life Africa of the Igbo people from Nigeria. So
it's also the language of the author's family, because her parents are Nigerian and she's American born. And so that's another part of this.
Yeah. So she's putting a lot of her own background, as well as, her kind of, oh, thank you, Chloe. I'm catching up. So here we go. We're going to post the Nnedi's reading guide right there.
The fact that this is set in post-apocalyptic Sudan reminded me of a tinfoil theory in the fandom that says that what if all of the events in A Song of Ice and Fire happened after the apocalyptic event of like the oily black stone being a comet that destroyed everything,
Right.
and now their history is starting over. I don't subscribe to it, but I've always appreciated it as a creative tinfoil.
As a theory. Well, there are all kinds of theories.
There are all kinds of theories. For all kinds of fans.
There are all kinds of people, and or we have all kinds of theories. I'm going to post, or I'm going to give Chloe another link to post. This is, I thought this was really fascinating. Before we go to talk about the book itself, her inspiration for the character comes from something that was happening in the real life genocide in Sudan, in Darfur. Apparently the Janjaweed, who were the Arab soldiers in that conflict, were weaponizing rape as a way of sort of seeding light-skinned offspring into their, the dark-skinned people who lived there. And it was very devastating in their culture, because that's, their culture is based on heritage and that sort of thing. So it was a real insidious and evil way of trying to ruin that culture. And just a fascinating article. Again, big warning if you it's obviously it's an article about weaponized rape. So for what it's worth, but it is an interesting, I found that she used that as an inspiration for this character, who I guess we should explain why that's relevant, because Anya Sanyu is the child of an Okiki woman who was raped by a Nuru, the lighter-skinned people in the story, man. And this book is her story. The Yuwu people are bastards, and they're not generally not welcome in either culture, right?
And a theme. Obviously, bastardy is a connecting theme between Song of Ice and Fire and this novel. The protagonist, Onyesonwu, is twice ostracized socially, because since she's light-skinned and she's living predominantly among her mother's people, the dark-skinned Okeke, they see her and know that she doesn't belong. And there's some really blatant ostracization that happens. I mean, as blatant as people just looking at her going, "Hey, woo," because that's the word for bastard in this book. And the other reason that she's ostracized socially is because she's a sorceress. And not only is that a scary thing, but it's also a man's job, largely speaking. And so flipping gender roles is another big theme in this book, and overcoming cultural legacies which are unethical.
Yeah.
Which is never an easy task, but also a theme in A Song of Ice and Fire.
Yes. Yeah, there was a lot of, I found just reading it, and I didn't write them down because, silly me, at the time I thought, oh, I'll remember all these things. But there were numerous moments reading this book where I found just a lot of synchrony, not necessarily parallels, but just, similar themes, and definitely points where you can say, oh, there's an intersection for sure.
Did you feel that Onye's character lined up particularly with one Song of Ice and Fire character, or did you feel like she was really multiple characters at once?
I felt probably, if I was thinking about that, and I thought about that a bit this week. Probably mostly one. Although there's a couple of other points, with, you could. So the one is Dany, but I think that there are other points because she's a sorceress. She might have some things in common with someone like Melisandre, and I don't know. Others? Do you think of any others?
I thought about Bran at a couple of moments, both because of the warging into other creatures, but also I thought very specifically of show Bran in the moment where she gets branded by the masquerade and it's on her hand and it causes her to be seen by the eye of Sauron, i.e. her evil father. Yeah. And I was like, what if the Night King was Bran's father?
Oh my gosh. Like that. We'll get you one of those. I should have brought my tinfoil hat. Get you one of those hats. Yes, but I do like things. I like it when you're reading like outside of A Song of Ice and Fire and something like that comes up and you're like, oh, wait a minute. Sometimes you just have to follow those thoughts through to their conclusion. So
back to the Dany parallel. I was thinking about how, since the show came out and we're now talking about how does the show inform the way we do or don't read the books, and what do we think is the future of Dany's relationship with perhaps mental instability. Something that was a very striking theme for me reading it was that it's almost like an important part of Onye Sonu's magical ability comes from her rage.
Yes.
And instead of a woman's rage in particular being vilified or something to be overcome, rationalized, if you will, that it's really a source of life-creating power in so many ways, and even literal life-creating power, as in raising people from the dead. And you see, I guess the closest parallel to that with Dany I could think of was when she's freeing slaves in Essos, but that's also, there are these power dynamics that are tinged with that.
Yeah.
As a cultural outsider and also as somebody in this position of power. And I guess Onye Sonu's position of power is her magical abilities as opposed to her class.
Say no. Wait a minute. Sorry, I said stop, but I didn't want to.
It's happening in real time with real people, folks.
I agree with you about the rage. And actually, when I was looking at, so we have our document that we kind of put together with some notes in it. And when I was looking at it earlier, I noticed all the times we wrote the word rage. I mean, it's, numerous times. I was highlighting several of them, going through, think it's a real theme. And I think that Dany with the slavers is one very good kind of parallel to some of the moments with Anye. But I also thought about the birth of the dragons, because I don't know if you would call it rage so much, but extreme emotion definitely played a role. I mean, it was more at that point, I guess, kind of just a cold rage. It wasn't the sort of fiery rage that you see Anye possessing and channeling in this story. But it's that sort of making the female emotions, which are often discounted or called hysteria or what have you. Female emotions are very often not accepted by people. Well, this is an instance of them actually being turned into power. which I think is among many other things that Nnedi has to say about female power is pretty compelling. So.
When you mentioned the birth of the dragons, I was just thinking another connecting thing there is grief, because Dany is grieving Drogo's loss, and in many ways, Onye's rage is connected to deep grief about the nature of her existence as a child of rape and as a cultural outsider. My husband James would like to say hi in the chat.
I found your tinfoil hat.
And he made me a tinfoil hat. Look at that.
That's amazing. Oh my gosh. Just like that. We said tinfoil hat and a tinfoil hat appeared.
Y'all didn't know that was coming, did you?
No.
This is a gem only for those who are willing to come to this chat. That's
well, that was just awesome. Best. Yeah. So we'll get back to that because I have something else to say about kind of rage and emotion and all that, and magic and all that, but more it's at the end. It has to do with what happens at the very end. So I don't want to jump ahead that far.
Do you want to go through it chronologically? Or is, I don't know, what do you think?
We sure can, and we've hit a bunch of the, we mentioned that it was, the story's told in 3 parts basically, and it deals with her childhood and then her training and then her kind of journey to the culmination of the story, right?
The big theme of part 1 is her 11th rite initiation. And this is another trigger warning, guys, just in case there's anybody here who hasn't read it. This refers to female genital mutilation or female circumcision. Yeah.
Nnedi has some interesting things to say about that in the link to her study guide or her reading guide. She encourages people to think very deeply about this subject. Refers you to an article written by Alice Walker called Warrior Marks. But I think she would say that her approach is quite different from Alice Walker's approach. Naturally, I'm sure, because they come from very different backgrounds. Not surprised about that. So
I feel the need to take this off because we're talking about a serious subject right now. So I'm going to do that in order to respect the subject.
I can save it for later. Save it for
I will. If I have to take one thing to wrap this up.
When we get back to blood magic and warging. So, you mentioned about we both mentioned, I think, about a lot of the female themes. You've got themes about power or subjugation or of women's bodies or empowerment or using how a female body is related to power, because it does turn out, and it's hinted early in the book, I think, that a pregnant woman has some sort of astounding power, but then you don't learn more about that until the very end. So I'm just looking. We have a question.
I was just thinking about how with Dany, she's so frequently called the mother of dragons, and so motherhood is a really important part of her identity. But in Onye's case, it's not motherhood so much as like female embodiment. And so if female circumcision is meant to take away a certain amount of that power of embodiment such that women can't enjoy sex anymore, and like that being an important source of power, it makes a lot of sense why her 11th rite initiation would be the moment when she realizes she has powers.
Yeah.
And you wonder if she hadn't had that, procedure done, what her training with Aro would have been like later on.
Yeah. Yep. That's a good question. And also, again, this from Nnedi. I can't claim that this was my brilliant observation, but
we're all standing on the shoulders of somebody.
We really are. Yeah. But she points out that, you know, she gains all of her friends that kind of follow her through the story. She has 3 very close female friends. And prior to that, 11th Right shouldn't have any friends because she was Iwu. She was really ostracized, and it was only through participating in that ritual that she was accepted as a member of their sort of community, and she got these 3 gained these 3 very close friends. So she, you know, Nnedi talks about the role that shared pain and fear and healing and all the dangers, all that experience that they went through, have in actual, you know, emotional bonds that people share with each other, and you know how that translates into real life. And also, you know, I think this is what you were just saying too. So it's a flip side of that. This was kind of a necessary part of Anye's story arc for her to play out the way it did, because she wouldn't have had those friends to accompany her. She might not have even, you know, been taken in for her initiation and training without having gone through that experience. So
I think in a lot of ways, her friends humanize her. I mean, she is a human, but she has these superhuman abilities. And so her experience of that event and subsequent events are colored by that. But her friends don't have that experience, and that creates tension between them. For example, Onye Sunwoo kind of realizes that she can heal herself at a certain point, and grow back that which was lost. And her friends obviously can't do that. And so I guess my reading of that is that kind of sets the stage for what is her responsibility toward the people around her with the powers that she has.
Mm-hmm.
And can she empathize with the people around her who don't have the powers that she has?
Mm-hmm. I think she struggles with that. I think, honestly, without Amwita, her partner, I think she would have missed that. You know, he seems to be more of a grounding for her, especially as their relationship, you know, goes on.
He was a real Jon Snow to me. I thought he was a very strong parallel with Jon Snow.
It was a book about Jon and Dany, let's face it.
Yeah, kind of.
So let's talk about the Ada, because she's this, you know, sort of like the she's like the wise woman of their little community of Jwahir, the village that they live in. She's highly respected, and she's independent. She lives by herself. She lives, you know, in her own home. She supports herself, and she's got, you know, the respect of the village elders. So on the one hand, she's a very, you know, independent and empowered female, which I think makes her unique amongst the village elders. But on the other hand, she plays a big role in this 11th Right. She's, you know, there. She helps enchant the scalpel, or
well, I know she's there and Nana the Wise is there.
Yeah.
And actually, I wasn't entirely clear on what is the Adah's relationship to Nana the Wise.
Yeah.
Like, does Nana the Wise have the same cultural status or abilities that the Adah has, or did she train her? Or, I don't know. But yes, wise women of the village, including this person.
Yeah. And we find out later that she's married to Arrow, who becomes the sorcerer, who becomes Anya's teacher. So I think one of the things that Nnedi wants us to think about in terms of even Nana the Wise and the Adah's involvement in these practices of FGM, female genital mutilation, is, what that means about, the complexities of female empowerment, because here you have women who are leaders of the community, and they're being very involved in perpetuating a practice that to a lot of us seems like the opposite of empowerment, right? So I guess what I'm saying, kind of stumbling through, is that it's complicated. And she wants us, Nnedi Okorafor, the author, wants us to realize that it's very complicated, and that it's one thing for us to recoil in horror and fear and think that this is an awful practice, but it is, but at the same time it's very complicated.
Yeah, and I'd add to that these complex cultural dynamics are one of the reasons why, if practices like this are to change, it's really important that the force of that change comes from within the community, instead of as a byproduct of colonialism from the outside. Because even if your intentions are really good, how many of these nuances will be lost?
Right. Yeah. So this isn't the only time where I think in the story that she encourages us to consider the complexities of kind of relationships and, things that at first glance you might see as black and white. But when you start to kind of pick them apart, you realize that there's a lot more layers to those onions. And that was something that I found had a lot of resonance with A Song of Ice and Fire.
If an onion is black with rot, the whole onion is rot.
Exactly. Characters and situations are all gray. So we did have a question.
Oh,
in the you can see it in the chat there.
Oh, it's in the private chat. I was looking at the live comments.
I know. So
ooh.
I think this is a question for Lydia. It seems like up your like maybe up your alley. Is it?
It is, although I would admit freely to not being a specialist in Hinduism. So I'm thinking about Melisandre. Chloe's question is, with all the religious culture that Gurm brings in, do you think he may have pulled from the ideas of goddesses like Tekai or Kali to influence the idea of a woman's rage, not only being a literal force of nature, but also creator of life? Actually, as I'm reading that out loud, now I'm thinking about Lady Stoneheart. I started out thinking about Melisandre, but I think Lady Stoneheart embodies all of those things for sure.
Definitely.
With Melisandre, I was just thinking about her having a traumatic past as a slave, and then her magical abilities empowering her later. And of course, there's a lot we don't know about her story, but it has enabled her to both escape that situation and also gain some class status that she definitely wouldn't have had otherwise, and also travel, and also eternally, as far as we know.
Yeah. So Melisandre, I think Lady Stoneheart, that's a good one. And also Mallory, I just looked at the chat. Thank you. My hair is shaggy and terrible, like so many of us, but I appreciate that. I haven't had a haircut in a very long time, but
yeah.
but I'm paying him.
Some of us have tried quarantine cuts that didn't go so well. So
yeah. Well, I'm under my hairdresser has warned us all to stay away from the scissors in the box dyes. So I'm just trying to tough it out.
Tangentially to Chloe's question.
Yeah.
It's actually Fear's Death.
Now that I'm reading it, it's a question from Shelby.
Oh, I thought it said Chloe. Oh, Shelby said. Yes. Okay. Oh, you referenced Shelby's question. Very sorry, Shelby. I want your name to be known. First of her name. First of the questions. This is really skipping around, but at the very end of the book, there's a moment where Onye Sonu is able to essentially impregnate herself, not without external help, but she does. And when that happened, I was thinking about an Egyptian myth about how Isis conceives Horus, because her husband Osiris has been killed by his evil brother Set, and there's variants on this myth, just like, well, there are in many sacred stories, but his body is broken into pieces and scattered all over the kingdom. And Isis has to go and reassemble Osiris's body and then uses that body to impregnate herself and then becomes the mother of Horus, who is also a god. And that, I don't know, it felt resonant, that story, at the end of this book. But I am skipping around, so we can come back to that later.
Yeah, no, but I love that. I didn't think of that. I've heard that myth before, but I'm not enough that I would think of it and apply it to this book. But I think that's a great. I would be surprised if it wasn't some kind of an influence, because it is very, 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 very close to what happens. So.
And even Melisandre has a shadow baby, so there's also that.
Well, that's what I was thinking, like, because we were talking about people that were, the power of creation. I mean, so what the question from Shelby about, rage, allowing you to be the character to be a force of nature, but also a creator of life. I mean, I'd say that applies more to Melisandre with her shadow babies. Than
the shadow baby feels like a facsimile of life.
Yeah, it's not really life. It's like it's life force, right? I mean,
yeah, it's Stannis's life force, where she's almost recycled in a way.
Yeah. Well,
so maybe Melisandre would be like, she can't be the maternal Dany figure because she's doing this recycling and like depleting people of their life force, which is the opposite of life-giving. However, if we were to see perhaps her practice resurrection, maybe if that happens in Winds of Winter, we might have a totally different read on this and see it as like a redemptive arc or something. I don't know. I would read her differently as a character, maybe.
Yeah, I think maybe we all will be reading her very differently at the beginning of Winds of Winter. Our latest episode, which is just out for patrons and will be out early next week for the public, is the beginning of our Winds of Winter primer. And we're talking about the North and Theon and Asha and Stannis and Jon and Melisandre. So we have a little bit to say about that in that episode. What's Mel going to be up to at the beginning of the Winds of Winter? I think we'll probably all be.
I look forward to that.
Yeah. Well, I look forward to finding out what she'll be like, really finding out.
I mean, I look forward to your episode on it, but I am also looking forward to the book itself.
Yeah. Well, we are too, which is why we're doing these episodes now, because I feel like, fingers crossed. Maybe there's one thing the coronavirus is going to get us. And that's,
we can only hope.
I'm not even going to say it. Let's move on to.
Okay.
I like the part 2. We could just conclude part 1 of Onya's story ends with her stepfather dying, and again, it's her kind of rage or extreme emotion allows her to use this sort of untrained magical power that she has to momentarily resurrect him. So that's right in line with what we were just talking about. And that's kind of the end of part 1 of the story, because at that point, the local sorcerer Arrow decides that she's actually too dangerous to just be left out there on her own, and he realizes that he has to teach her. You can't just let this girl be running around resurrecting dead people without knowing how to do it properly.
Prophecy comes up in here too, because part of why he takes her on as a student is because he realizes he was misreading this prophecy all this time, which is very reminiscent to me of the Valonqar prophecy.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah,
especially the whole gendery thing.
Yep, true. Because he really didn't want to take her on as a student, specifically because she was a woman, right? But then
this is an inconvenient reading of this prophecy, and I reject it. Is that right?
Yeah. So in this section, there is actually, I think part 2 is probably the shorter of the 3 parts, but there's a lot of resonance in part 2 with the Song of Ice and Fire. There's mentorship is a theme. It's very strong in the book as a whole, but specifically concentrated in this second section. And going on, you learn the story, like the backstory about Anya's parents, both of whom were also mentored by people who are characters in the book. But I think this has a lot of resonance with many characters in A Song of Ice and Fire, specifically Bran. I was like a combination of Bran and Sansa.
That would be a very different series indeed.
Sorry, that's a weird. Forget that. Forget you ever heard that. So those 3 siblings are all being mentored by actually more than a succession of people as part of their greater journeys through the story. So mentorship. Yeah, if you look at the idea of the hero's journey, having a mentor is a big part of it. And this second part is about Anya, with her mentor, Arrow. And
her training with Arrow reminded me a little bit of Arya being in the House of Black and White.
Yeah.
There's a lot of inconvenient things about it, like being taunted when you can't accomplish something, or being told just do it and not how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So some antagonism there with your mentor. You don't always like your mentor.
Right. Not necessarily. You just have to do it. There was, you had mentioned, and I actually think this is going back to Joy here. I'm not sure if this was in part 2 or if it was in part 1 before she started her training. The House of Asubu.
Mm-hmm. That's a part 2.
I don't even know how to describe it, but it reminded us both of things from A Song of Ice and Fire. So, is it the Addis house?
None of the wise lives there.
Yeah, okay.
And it does seem like, though, that a lot of other magical people hang out in there.
Mm.
And it's almost like the house is alive.
Yeah.
in its own way. Like the house hears things, and it doesn't need real security because the house itself can be like a house of mirrors. You can get lost in the house.
Yeah.
I don't know. I thought that was a cool scene.
It was interesting, and it reminded me, because of all that sort of House of Mirrors stuff, it reminded me of the House of the Undying. And I have to say that I felt a bigger sense of dread than I probably needed to feel because of my associating it with that. But that's what A Song of Ice and Fire has done to me. Whenever I'm reading something, or watching something on TV is, perfectly normal, and maybe it's happy. Maybe it's a happy story. I'm always waiting for the terrible thing to happen.
Best to approach with a sense of dread so you can always be pleasantly surprised.
You're like, oh, wait, the bad thing didn't happen. All the bad things I could have imagined. Yeah.
It's a sort of pessimistic realism.
Right.
Maybe. That's the gift George has given us.
But they have got, it's almost like it's their citadel. I liked what you had to say, Ted, really, because it seems like the people kind of just hang out there, and it's a place of learning. And
yeah, and it is open to the public. Like anybody could just wander in, but maybe the house knows your intentions or something before you go in. I imagined that.
Yeah. So that was that. She does. I mean, what else is there during her training? She's got warging.
Yeah, that is a theme. Dreams, dragon dreams, green dreams.
Maybe blood magic.
Yeah, blood is an interesting theme in this book because the blood connected to the body is a life force. But then also that, only death can pay for life. It isn't always that extreme in Who Fears Death. Sometimes it's always a trade-off, something for something. And when she makes her father's body breathe at his funeral, that felt a little bit like Miri Mazdor's sort of partial resurrection of Khal Drogo. He's not really a person, but he's alive. Mm-hmm. What is life, and does he have it?
Yeah. Yeah.
I was reading over this. Anything we missed? Yeah.
What's her initiation? That is huge.
Because, that's important.
Very important. As part of her initiation, she sees her own death.
Which is important to the title of the book, you might say.
Yeah, exactly. So you get, it's weird. It's all very circular because her name is Who Fears Death.
Yes.
But yeah, it's almost like maybe.
Does her name give her destiny?
Yeah.
Does her name empower her towards her destiny? Or is it more of the circular time thing?
Yeah. Did her mother, in the third part, you find out more about her mother's background. So, and her father. So that seems increasingly possible. But she does learn how she will die, which I think that's what's necessary apparently in order to become a sorcerer, is to confront your death. That's why her partner Amrita does not actually pass the initiation, because he can't confront, or is unable to confront his own death.
Yeah.
But she does see it, and it empowers her. So rather than breaking her, which is what it does with a lot of people, she draws power from it. So.
I admit to being confused. She meets somebody named Sola in this vision, and he crops up again later in the book, but that was one of those kinds of details that I had a hard time connecting or understanding and listening to it as an audiobook. Like he comes up later and I'm like, who the hell is this guy? And he's mentioned before, but like, why does he know? He knows people? Is he a real person? Is he like a cold hands person? I don't know.
Yeah.
Master, I don't know.
I have a hard time with people. I think I told you that, I have a hard time sometimes with lots of names, which actually is a funny thing. I almost didn't read A Song of Ice and Fire because years ago, when I first picked up Game of Thrones, I read the first few chapters and I was just like, what the heck is with all these names, all these weird, like, they're not like normal names. They're like just barely off. I don't understand.
Yeah.
I can't keep track of too many. And I just remember telling my friend that gave me the book, I'm not reading this book. And she said, you really should read it. And I did. And
we're also grateful that to that friend.
I'm grateful to that friend. I haven't talked to her in a long time.
Please tell that friend the whole fandom thanks them.
Yeah. I have had a chance to say thank you to her for, because it obviously changed my life a lot. So glad I didn't give up over Eddard and whatever, I don't know, whatever was rubbing me the wrong way. But anyways, my point being about this is that with the names, I find I really just have to give a person a picture in my head. It's almost like a pictogram. It's not even necessarily an image of a human being. It's just that picture that goes with that person, and that's how I keep track of people. Sounds weird, but that's complex if you're listening to it on audio, though.
Yes, that is also true, because sometimes those are the details that you skip past it because your attention was grabbed by something else.
Yeah.
I do, like, in terms of descriptions, though, one thing I did enjoy about this book were the descriptions of all of these different culture groups that Onye and her friend group encounter as they're traveling. And you get the sense, even though you might know this is a post-apocalyptic scenario, and I don't know enough about the geography of Sudan or the region in general to know if these are real place names or if these are place names that the author invented. She's very meticulous about describing how if you walk just a few miles away, you'll go somewhere with completely different cultural customs or a completely different language or a completely different style of dress. There's one community that the group visits that is kind of like the Dornish and that they practice free love. And that's a little jarring because the group is like, I don't know, that's not how they do back home.
Yeah.
And they're like, what? We just want to love you. All of it.
Yeah. Yeah, it is on that journey. That's actually, so this is my favorite part. This is now the third part of the book when they're having this journey, which begins when Onye has another kind of rage moment because the people in their village are making fun of her, and she finds them so annoying, and they're so complacent about the violence that she knows is happening in other parts, where there's genocide being conducted against their people. But here they are, this little village. They're so far to the east that they're not even touched by it. So she uses her magic to bring this piece of the violence into the town square just for a minute, which understandably terrifies people. It's not really the right way to go about enlightenment. So she decides that she's got to do something about the problem. And a good thing, too, because Arrow basically decides that she's got to go because the townspeople are now pretty ticked off at her, and she's going to face reprisals if she doesn't leave. So she leaves with all of her group of friends, and that's where this journey starts. So they're journeying far to the west to try to find, the kind of the source of the conflict between the Okeki and the Neuro.
And also related to that, you get the sense about how many people don't know their own history, how many people don't know the source of this conflict or don't believe it when they hear it because they have really strongly ingrained ideas. You know, like one of those recurring ideas is that all people who are Ewu, who are bastard children of rape, are inherently violent.
Yeah.
You know, and so that is also a complicating factor in Onye's rage because she is a person and feels rage, even if she isn't like defined as only a rageful person. The people around her, when she's feeling rage, are going to read that and project that identity onto her, such that she now has this responsibility to represent Ewu in a particular way, as we are not this, but I as a person am having a rage moment right now.
Yeah, right.
There's definitely bigger things to meditate upon there as well.
Definitely. And we get back in this section. We learn a lot about her natural father, who is a sorcerer who's basically been trying to kill her in the spirit world, I guess you would say. Ever since the 11th, she went through the 11th rite for whatever reason that enabled him to reach her through her dreams. And I'm assuming because he's a powerful sorcerer, he knows something about her kind of destiny, you know, a prophecy or something. And so he's trying to kill her. So you learn all the backstory of both of her parents. But what's interesting is the backstory of Amwita's parents, because you see this genocide kind of taking place, right? The Nuru against the Okeki, which is inspired by Darfur, and it appears to be just a very simple sort of racially motivated, you know, the lighter skinned people are trying to obliterate the darker skinned people, but you learn that it's actually a lot more complicated than that, because Amwita, whose parents were Nuru and Okiki, were actually they were in love. So he was not, unlike Onye, he's not a child of rape, but he's a child of sort of forbidden love. And he was raised by Nuru parents who actually loved him and cherished him, and then were murdered by Okiki freedom fighters, who then kidnapped him and forced him to be a child soldier, during which time he witnessed, you know, rape and murder and horrible things, i.e. war. So you see that there's two sides to this. It's not just a simple, here's bad guys and they're, you know, they're trying to kill all the good guys. There's bad guys on both sides. And holy cow, if that doesn't have resonance with Song of Ice and Fire, I don't know what does.
And in this book, an important part of crossing that cultural divide is you have to be willing to learn the other group's language. So Onye and some of her friends decide to be committed to learning the Nuru language as they go along, which requires setting aside some of the anger that you have. And this is a tinfoil moment. This is an opportunity for me to put this hat back on. I'm just wondering, is it possible for people to learn the language of the others? Can they talk to them and find out who they are?
They have a language. Yeah, I like it. They have a language. And actually, that's something that we've been talking about, those languages, because we're already working on our next episode. So as far as that goes, we've actually had some pretty deep conversations about the language of the others. Ooh. And the language of the old tongue, and then also the language of the children of the forest. So they all have their own unique languages, and as far as who can speak which one, it's interesting. I don't see why someone couldn't learn the language of the others. I mean,
unless you can't physically make those sounds.
Unless we can't make those sounds, but they're humanoid, so
We're getting short on time. We should probably try and zip through section 3 real fast.
Yep. Yeah. Well, actually, we touched on a lot of the notes. So we talked about their journey, and
there's Binta's death.
Yep.
Binta dies defending her magical friend when a village rises against her, and she is one of the innocent casualties of this tribal war.
Yes. But then in retaliation, more rage from Anya Sanyu, she blinds the entire town in revenge. So
and not just like now, it's their children shall also be blind. It's like
it's Papa. She just makes it like a very much of a like a curse forever. So
and I guess that, well, we don't know what will happen with Missandei in the books, but that has some resonance there too, at least for the show narrative of how Missandei dies protecting, as becomes a casualty of something much bigger, and she's protecting a more powerful person who then turns out in the show version to perhaps, like, you can question, was it worth it or not?
Yeah, right.
Okay. You want to talk about Seven Rivers Kingdom? Because you were excited about
that. Seven Rivers Kingdom. Yeah. Well, I brought up my whole genocide, that's the first of all, Seven Rivers Kingdom. I mean, it's seven, the 7 kingdoms. I mean, I don't know. There was so many little, it was just one of the many little things that made me go, oh, kind of, if I tilt my head, this is very similar to A Song of Ice and Fire.
Well, when I saw that, I thought you were thinking about her dream where she's flying and sees that one patch of green in a whole barren desert. And then I was thinking, well, that's a dream of spring right there.
Yes. Yeah. It definitely was. Yeah. It's an interesting, it's this revelation to them, right? That there's a place like this because they're from a desert, and I don't think they've ever seen anything like this. So the fact that exists is pretty remarkable. So look, just to get quickly to there, they've finally realized that that's where Anya Sanyu's father is in the Seven Rivers Kingdom. They have to get there. They know that they have to basically kill or somehow incapacitate him because he's the one who's causing all of this. So her goal is to rewrite the great book.
The prophecy, as it were.
Yeah, which is basically she's got to change reality. And in order to do that, she has to neutralize her father, her natural father, one way or the other, which, I touched on the hero's journey earlier. And so that's just another element of, sort of the hero's journey, because, exceeding your master, or, somehow escaping, the ties that bind you to past is definitely part of a hero's journey. So they do lose a couple more friends. They have the one Binta who dies, and then a couple of the others decide to go back because they're just not really happy out here and all this foreignness. They just really can't deal with all the different people and the different places, and it's put a lot of stress on their relationship. So Didi and Fanasi leave them.
This is well, maybe it's circling back to something I said before, but it's interesting in this post-apocalyptic world where people do have technological devices and apparently have access to things like the internet, maybe, and magic is juxtaposed with this, that even with all of that, history is still lost. People still don't know that there is, in fact, a green place in the middle of the desert. Or there's a kind of a powerful line where Onye Tsonwu is having this dream journey where she's flying over the land and she sees this green oasis in the middle of the desert. And she says, oceans. My mother always talked about oceans like they really existed, you know? So you really are getting that vision of a future where no one knew what it used to be like before the disaster. And I think that definitely applies to Song of Ice and Fire, because you've got the songs, but you're trying to sort fact from fiction. A lot of people don't remember what things were like. The summer children don't remember what things were like before during the long night or before the long, you know.
Yeah, but they don't remember the lessons of history have been lost to them for sure. And in this story, I think it's fascinating because I feel like it's almost an inversion where their use of technology or that sort of like, you know, knowledge that comes with technology is viewed as something from the past or a disappearing world, whereas magic is very much kind of present and with them all the time. It's a very modern, in their sense, thing. It's very, very much accepted. Whereas I think that maybe some kinds of technology are kind of viewed with a little suspicion, just because they're probably moving away from that past and forgetting, you know, what the usefulness of these things were. So it's like an inversion of our world, you know, where we sort of take that view of magic or magical thinking, that it's, you know, maybe it's something that exists, but is it really very useful?
And that creates a convenient segue to Onye's confrontation with her father, because she finds him in his office and on his desk is a basket of CD-ROMs or discs of some kind. I imagine them as CD-ROMs. But he's used these discs to document his own atrocities.
Yes.
And that's such a powerful and complicated image. It's literally controlling the narrative and what you hope will be remembered about you afterwards. And that's what he equates with his importance and his power. And I guess I was just, if there's also that piece where people don't remember their own pasts, it's almost like he's invested in people continuing to believe the story that the Okeke and the Onuru are fatefully destined to always be at war. There should never be a possibility where that isn't the case. Like he's perpetuating it.
Yeah, that was that's pretty powerful. So she has this confrontation with her father, or she and
Lita.
I don't know if we go spoiler free here.
Oh,
I
don't know, y'all read it, right?
Everybody read it.
Duck out now if you didn't.
Yeah. Cover your ears if you don't want to hear this, but basically, all the men die, and Rita. You know, I should have gone back and reread it, because this is the kind of thing that you read it once and you're kind of like, I don't know, you're so caught up in what's actually happening that maybe the mechanics of how it happened or get a little bit confused. But it's only in wordplay, but it was sort of a Valor Morghulis moment, because all the men did die, but that was the way of ending the genocide, because the war was being conducted by the men, obviously. I guess it's not obviously, but in this story it was. That pretty much ends the war, right? Or, the war between the Naru and the Okiki then and there, because there's really no one left to carry it on.
And that is paralleled, all of the men dying is paralleled in the rewritten ending with what happens to all of the women in the rewritten story.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So that's something I've questioned about.
So the whole story, we find out later, this was also confusing on the audiobook, that she is dictating her story to somebody. And when I was listening to it, I was like, wait, she's in prison? What?
Yeah. So you find out that this is the ending that she saw for herself. Mm-hmm. This is her death. You eventually, the points of the story, all kind of come together, and you see that she ends up in prison. She ends up pregnant, like you said, and she's in prison. It's interesting, as an aside, her pregnancy, and this has been foreshadowed and talked about, or leading up to this, acted as an amplifier to her magic for whatever reason. And I wondered if you saw any, if you were reminded of sort of the Miri Mazdor, Dany Drogo. Did we already talk about this? I know we already talked about this, but maybe not in this exact sense.
Well, there is that whole prophecy will bite your cock off every time.
Yeah.
And people constantly misinterpreting prophecy in Song of Ice and Fire. But in this case, it's like there is a literal and intentional rewriting of prophecy, which, you could ask, what is the power of prophecy, and is prophecy necessarily predetermined, or can prophecy be rewritten? So let's say Dany is Azor Ahai. Can that be changed? And suddenly she won't be, because someone else, or something else happens. Jon Snow's supposed to kill the Night King, but then Arya kills the Night King. And prophecy gets rewritten.
Yeah.
It's a mixed looking show there. I don't know.
Yeah. So we just got a message from Tara. We are short on time, so we have to wrap it up. Basically, let's just touch on the alternate ending, because the book ends with basically Amrita dies because all the men dies. Then Anya's friend Luyu dies, helping her, helping to hold off the sort of the troops while Anya finishes rewriting the book. Then she's captured, and then she's killed as she had foreseen. But then there's this alternate ending. So I had questions.
Right. Because since she dies in the first one, her unborn child also dies. But then in the rewritten ending, there's a question about, does the unborn child live, or are they living on in a spirit realm? This is, I guess, I'm going to say something about the Westeros plot, but not this current season. So if anyone has feelings about Westworld, did I say Westeros or Westworld?
Yeah, you said Westeros.
World.
I knew what you meant too. So okay.
Yeah. But in last season, Maeve guides all of the, the androids essentially into a digital afterlife that has been created for them, where they can live. And I was thinking about this as a created reality, possibly, because she's responsible for that shift. And then I guess if you want to go the sci-fi direction, you can ask about the many worlds theory, and if the old reality is existing alongside this one, and if there was a break in the timeline.
Right, and she just jumped off to a different reality. Or what I was wondering is, in the process of rewriting the book, did she actually change reality? Did she, and thus change her own destiny? So she died to achieve this rewriting of the book, but having achieved that, did that then go back and actually just whoosh, change the past and just make this whole new reality come into existence? And I was trying to think of other stories where achieving some sort of goal at the end of a quest meant that the past was somehow altered and erased to create a whole new present and future. I couldn't really
where
think
there's time travel, I suppose. Or you could argue in the show version, what happens with the hold the door scene, where Bran is going back into, I mean, it's still a time travel-y thing, but he's going back into the past and affecting how Hodor becomes the Hodor he knows. Or in Galaxy Quest, when there's the Omega button and the Omega 13, and you get to go back for 13 seconds, and they're like, how can that possibly be valuable? But it is if you don't want to die. Completely unrelated media.
Well, if you guys can think of any other stories where achieving a goal or something like that changed the nature of the past or the story that had already been told, I don't know. Let us know, because I think that's interesting, and that was one of the key questions I had having read this book was, the heck was that ending on? So.
I haven't seen it often, for sure.
Yeah.
At least in the novels that I've read, this might be a first for me, but I like it as a concept.
It was just, it was very interesting. So definitely the type of thing that probably bears going back and rereading, even if you just reread the last couple chapters, because I'm sure there's a lot of details that you miss on the first read. So as always, I recommend rereading no matter what.
That's right. Yeah.
So
and now we're quarantined. We have all the time in the world.
Exactly. Like, what else are you doing? Go back and read the last 2 chapters of Who Fears Death, or reread the whole book if it's been a while.
Or A Song of Ice and Fire if it's been a while.
Yes, exactly. Join one of the fabulous reread podcasts in process, and hopefully, I think what we're all hoping is that we're going to go to the finish line, and then we're going to end up right there, and there's going to be Winds of Winter waiting for us when we get there. So
one can only hope.
So I guess we are going to have to wrap this up. Yep. And I don't know, do we need Tara to come back to shut us down or see us out? But anyways, this was fun.
I mean, I can come back at any time.
I didn't know if we needed you back.
I've been hanging out. I've been hanging out in the green room, in the wings, just chilling this whole time, working. Actually, doing day job work. All right, thank you guys so much for hosting this. Seriously, yes. Unfortunately I was only able to half listen, but thank you so much. And Lady Gwen, we'll see you tomorrow at 5 Eastern for the creators meetup for sure. And Lydia. And I will see you all if you're watching the Westeros live stream. We'll see you very shortly. Yeah, about 40 minutes.
That's going to be awesome.
Thanks everyone for joining. You guys have a wonderful evening. Bye.